With the increasingly widespread use of digital media in political activism and the boom of protests around the world in the last 2 decades, the role of the internet in influencing protests has become a popular topic of study among political scientists. What are protests? According to the definition provided by Anti-Defamation League, a protest is an event or action where people gather with others to publicly express their opinions about something that is happening in society. Their usual goals include influencing public opinion, drawing attention to and sharing information about a perceived injustice, pushing public policy or legislation forward, etc. The overarching purpose of protests is to demand change. Protests can take the form of marches, sit-ins, boycotts, and so on. What causes protests? Classic social science models emphasized individual motives as the main explanations. They assumed that people mobilize in protest because of grievances over a real or perceived unjust state of affairs. Recent explanations for protest focuses on the context in which protest movements operate. The political opportunity theories argue that political protest is more likely to be a feasible and useful tactic for achieving a particular goal in some political environments than in others. In most authoritarian countries, the idea of the normalization of protests has not been developed. By coding and analyzing protests between 2003 and 2012 in nearly 70 countries with autocracy regimes, Weidman and Rod, 2 political science scholars, find that the internet is not always beneficial to the establishment of democratic political structures, as some sociologists have predicted. In contrast, because it is usually under the sole control of authoritarian governments, it is locally introduced at a chosen time and in a manner that is conducive to increasing governments' regulatory and control power. Weidman and Rod discovered that the coverage of the internet reduces the likelihood of protests' occurrence by weakening citizens' incentives or distracting them. For example, the abundance of entertaining content on social media allows citizens to unconsciously reduce their consumption of politics. However, the internet is also a double-edged sword for the government. It also can be helpful for the spread of protests, since activists are also adept at using the internet for promotion and networking. Additionally, it is difficult for the government to curb the mobilization of protests that take place online. Therefore, the internet enhances the durability of protests in time and their capacity to expand in space due to the quick and widespread broadcast of information. Nevertheless, the spread of protest is also affected by the government's repressive tactics. Images or videos of brutal government crackdowns on prior protests that have been widely circulated on social media might make potential protest participants fearful. As a result, protests are less likely to spread in the same place as the previous protest. People in faraway locations, on the other hand, are more inclined to expect that violent repression will not occur, therefore the internet has a positive influence on the diffusion of protests that have already taken place. But even though digital media has had a multifaceted impact on the protests, mainstream media are still important to consider. It usually plays a key role in expanding the international reach of the events. Otherwise, TV and newspaper work together with social media, such as in the Occupy Central movement, and has made a complex impact. Throughout Occupy Central, they are the main battlefield of discourse debate on the concept of civil disobedience, while social media can accelerate the flow of mainstream media information and facilitate mobilization. The establishment of this media ecosystem is inextricably linked to Hong Kong's political ecology. Hong Kong is considered not under pure autocratic governance, but is semi-democratic and enjoys political freedom to a certain degree. Although regulated by the Chinese government, the mainstream media in Hong Kong still retain a certain degree of operational freedom and internal diversity. The complementarity of the two media makes Occupy Central some unique properties in the wave of protests of the same period, one example being the violent government repression that led directly to the birth of the Umbrella Movement. I hope this video will help you learn more about protest-related knowledge. This should be a reasonable way of defending civil rights, not a so-called riotous act.